let's get caught up on some new releases and start with these three. And I want to start with Black Adam just right away because it's a little confounding what seems to have happened, at least when this movie came out. It seems to have died down now, but I was kind of curious going into it. Obviously not curious enough to see it on time, but I have now. Where this was another one of those movies that was coming out, and the critics weren't very kind to it. It had like a 40 something or 30 something on Rotten Tomatoes or something. And then when people started seeing it, I feel like it was mostly matched with the same opinions, but there was also this other thing going on where it was, we've reached this point again where everybody wants to go after critics and say, oh, they're irrelevant, their opinions mean nothing, they don't know what they're talking about, all of that. That comes up every now and then. For a movie that seems to register with some fans, and obviously with comic book movies you're going to get that for sure, but it's very interesting to me that it seems like every time this happens, every time there's a group of people that tries to declare war on critics or whatever you want to call it, it's almost always ignited by the most bland and insignificant movies. And I don't want to seem like, I'm putting those people down for being passionate about a movie or anything like that, but it is kind of baffling that movies like Black Adam are the kind of thing that set that off, because I honestly was feeling absolutely nothing for this movie. It wasn't even there was a long time there where I wasn't even mad at it, where I wasn't even saying like, oh my god, this is so bad. I just didn't feel anything at all. I felt completely emotionless for like over an hour, which is like half the movie's runtime. And I was trying to think about that before we get into the details of the movie itself, about the idea of just kind of being superheroed out. Because a lot of people have been talking about superhero fatigue for 5 or 7 years or something, and I just wasn't getting that. Where it's like, they just kind of keep, doing new things with introducing new characters, doing all this stuff, and the way they connect. And I was just really, really into it for a long time, but I feel like it was right around this phase of Marvel that it's kind of starting to feel tired to me a little bit, and that could just be because I feel like the quality isn't as great, maybe. Like the last few shows that I actually watched of Marvel's, like Moon Knight and Loki and stuff like that, I just really wasn't into, and I've noticed that started to pour into the movies also. And you could say, oh, but this is DC and the whole DC and Marvel thing. I don't really do much separation between DC and Marvel. I'm not really one of those people that thinks one is significantly better than the other. It's just the quality of the movies is really what it depends on, and you can see that DC has been getting a little Marvel-y lately, and I feel like this is the biggest example of that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, I just want to throw it out there that even though I might throw out, like, this is how I feel about Marvel, and then this is how I feel about this, and it's like, it's really, the fact that, there's Marvel and DC is just kind of irrelevant to me. I do think one handles its, expansive story significantly better, obviously, but apart from that, as far as individual movies and experiences go, my mind doesn't really associate one or the other with just one particular movie or story that's going on, so yeah, so just in general, I feel like maybe I finally reached this superhero wall. And the thing about that also is, if you want to talk about, one being Marvel, one being DC, um, I, I obviously should be super psyched about the fact that Black Panther is on Friday. Because I absolutely love the first movie, and really anything associated with Black Panther, I absolutely love. But I've got a little bit of dread in me about Wakanda Forever coming out, not just because it's another superhero movie, but it's also like 2 hours and 41 minutes or something. And that's I think I might have hit my superhero wall, at least for a little bit. I don't think it's going to be permanent. I feel like it's just, there could be a break. So going into, I feel like maybe that has a lot to do with why I had so much non-feeling towards this movie. But then again, once the second half of the movie started to kick in, is when I kind of started to think like, oh, this might just actually not be good. Like, and that's the real problem. Because I felt like I was trying to give it the benefit of the doubt in the first half when I wasn't feeling anything. But then as it went on, it got worse. So, I think for starters, just the fact that when you go into a movie like this, you know exactly how it's going to start already. You know you're going to get the opening narration that's giving you all the backstory and all the exposition, and it's going to be in some faraway land in some faraway time, and there's going to be a particular object that's the focus of everything, and you can feel it going through the motions for a while, and then we're going to get introduced to a band of characters. One or two are going to be desperately unfunny attempts at comedy relief, and then there's going to be what felt like an eternity of just dicking around in a cave until the center of the story appears, until Black Adam appears, until Dwayne Johnson appears, whatever. And then it immediately goes into what becomes a problem throughout the movie, which is, we just talked about this when we talked about the Pirates franchise. The fact that movies can get very boring when they're nonstop action. And it feels like this is a movie that is pretty much nonstop action, which, could be praised in another sense. Like if you're talking about Fury Road or something. But when the action just feels like white noise, like every time, and the action needs to go on and on and on, then nonstop action is going to definitely be a problem. And I think it also doesn't help when you have inspired choices thrown in, uninspired choices thrown in, like the use of Paint It Black. Paint It Black, which is probably one of my favorite songs being used for this first big scene of destruction, does feel a bit on the nose. And I think one thing that I'm taking away from that is the fact that this is from John Colette Serra, who just did Jungle Cruise with Dwayne Johnson. We talked about him in the House of Wax video we just did, where it was, he's had these levels of his career where it started off in horror, then he did nothing but Liam Neeson movies, now he's probably doing nothing but Dwayne Johnson movies. And the thing about that, though, is not only did I, love Jungle Cruise for obvious reasons, but the way that he did this really inspired, completely out of left field thing by essentially making Nothing Else Matters basically the theme song to Jungle Cruise. It was so unexpected and random, yet somehow ended up really working. And to think that the director that made that very inspired music choice was just like, Black Adam appears, make it Paint It Black. It feels very sort of throwaway and on the nose and uninspired, so that also felt like it kind of set the mood of, is this going to be this director's vision, or is this just going to kind of be a product that just has his name on it? That he had to make sure didn't go downhill. And that's pretty much what it feels like. Then you get this very Iron Man-esque action scene, only instead of like him, blowing up bad guys and guys that had him hostage, it's just mass destruction. And that's the thing also, is the big question going into this movie, and the big, worry that people had was, is Black Adam going to actually be a villain like he is supposed to be? Now, I am really not well versed in any of the characters in this movie, so I can't really get that passionate about that. If I did, I'd be lying and being disingenuous. But I am under the impression that Black Adam is a villain, and specifically a Shazam villain. Shazam, who, obviously, those origins are going to cross over for him and Black Adam, but apart from that, I don't believe Shazam is ever mentioned in this movie. So there's that. Because obviously they have the other big thing they wanted to reveal. So, but before we get to that, another thing that this movie does is, I wanted to go a little bit more into the villain thing. I do like that he does seem uncontrollable for a bit, and uncontrollably destructive. That's like, okay, I can see where there's a villain in here. But I feel like the part where you have to start worrying is when he says, he just kind of keeps saying on a loop, I'm not a hero, I'm not here to be a savior, I'm not peaceful. And it's like, I feel like that kind of dialogue is there to basically just say, hey audience, we're kind of making him a good guy in this, but, you know, as long as he keeps saying this, will you be appeased? Will you think, like, you know, oh, he's still a villain? Well, I don't know. Because when you're doing a villain movie, I don't think one of the things you would want to introduce is a kid with a skateboard as a major character. And you'll probably ask yourself a lot of times throughout this movie, what year does this movie think it is? Because it does kind of feel like a movie that's from like the early to mid 2000s, as far as its, you know, bland quality goes. But then you introduce skateboard kid who skateboards everywhere with his jacket tied around his waist, and it's like, okay, now are we now in the present? Are we in the early 2000s, or are we just in the fucking 90s now? Like this kid, like this is the kind of kid that was a staple in like TV shows in like the mid 90s. Not even like not even the late 90s, the mid fucking 90s. So the problem with this also is that a lot of the drama in this movie pretty much solely depends on if you give a shit about this kid or not. So that's going to be a big problem also, because that's just not going to happen. So so like pretty much our main character is this kid and his mom, and honestly Black Adam and the heroes are feel like they're kind of in the background. I genuinely feel like Dwayne Johnson was barely in this, by the way. Just throwing that out there. When he wasn't like wreaking havoc and causing destruction, it just felt like he was either flying away somewhere else, or he was, you know, stuck in a cave somewhere, or he was like comatose underwater. It's like, all right, this is the movie that Dwayne Johnson took so long to get made and was so passionate about, and I feel like he's barely in it. So that just kind of gives you the idea. So as far as the other heroes here, like I said, I'm not well versed in any of these people, but we've got Pierce Brosnan, who's trying to bring some sort of life to this. But I feel like they definitely don't give him enough material. He's definitely just a CGI masked character flying around for too long. And that, like I said, he tries to bring some weight to it, but all the developments with his character meant absolutely nothing to me. So I put that on probably the writing. And then we have characters like Noah Centineo, is that his name? He's got like a Deadpool-esque mask, but he can grow like Ant-Man. But the thing here is that, and I know Marvel, DC, different universes, characters that have been around for a very long time and have their own different kind of things going on. As far as this movie adaptation goes, just reminding of other things is all I'm saying. But the thing about this character also that's particularly annoying is the fact that he's kind of the comedy. Like when I talked about the movie gets Marvel-y in its sense of humor, it has a lot to do with this guy. This is the kind of guy that like knocks over buildings and says, "I'm sorry, was that expensive?" And he basically acts like Tom Holland's Spider-Man, essentially, as far as his personality goes. And he gets thrown out of an aircraft at one point and says, you know, that was not cool. And it's that kind of bullshit. And that's basically all the character is. And I feel he himself was probably only cast because he, not based on talent, but just the fact that he like makes teenage girls giggle or some shit. I don't know. Isn't he just from like Netflix romantic comedies or something? I don't know. But it's not just, you know, Marvel that it feels like all this comes from. There is a Dark Knight moment where a kid is dropped because they say, you know, like the villain has the kid, and you know, Black Adam says drop the kid, and he says a variation on very poor choice of words like Ledger's Joker did, and drops the kid. And he says, be more careful with your words or some shit, and drops him. And it's like, oh, is that an homage because they're both DC? No, I think it's just laziness, honestly. And I think it's also lazy, not just because it's a similar situation and a similar line, but the fact that they do it twice. Like, twice right in a row. There's that whole thing. And they do a lot of things dialogue-wise twice in a row, or multiple times in a row. Like, they set up this banter between him and Brosnan about sarcasm. And at first you think he's being all Drax-like, where like he doesn't understand sarcasm, but then he seems to either already know sarcasm or he quickly learns it from Brosnan. So they do this sarcasm banter like 3 times consecutively in a row. And you can just see the writing going in circles. And it's a when they're putting this much effort into it, as far as like the banter between superheroes or whatever. Imagine how the plot's going, which is once again just there's an object and it's being used by a villain and they have to get it before he does. There's a point in time like an hour and a half or so into the movie where we just have two characters sitting in a CGI filled room just giving exposition for what felt like a very, very long time. An hour and a half in. The movie's only like 2 hours. It's maybe a few minutes over 2 hours. And like an hour and a half in, we're getting yet another exposition dump. Even after everything in the whole opening scene and everything throughout, it's still going. So, like I said, it just... That, on top of the very boring and repetitive action scenes that, like I said, more or less look like the same as any other comic book movie when they're not just white noise in between. We do get to a point where the villain gets his sort of takeover point. And it's just nothing. Like it's like you kind of get the sense like, oh, the stakes are raised now, and it's like, and you could say that's any movie where you could say, oh, it doesn't matter when the villain takes over because we know the hero will ultimately prevail and beat them. But like that's every movie, so why go after this movie? But it's like I particularly didn't care when the villain has the moment where it's like, oh, he might actually win. No, you never ever feel like the villain's gonna win in this. I feel like the villain gets a little less screen time than Black Adam, I think, and like I said, Black Adam's screen time already felt pretty low. So, like I said, it's mostly just focused on the other characters. And the other characters, I don't even mean the superheroes. I mean the fucking mom and her kid and her stupid brother. But that's all that's going on here. I felt like this movie had no real destination. It kind of feels like... It definitely feels rushed, I will say that. But like I said, I don't really want it to be any longer either. So I don't know. It's just kind of a disaster in total. And like I said, I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt for a while there. Like I said, the fact that it just got worse as it went. And not to mention they keep throwing in Snyder slow-mo. So it's like, that's another thing too. It's like, as if the action scenes aren't dull and repetitive and boring enough, think about how much shorter they would be if they didn't have slow-mo in them. They'd be like 20 seconds long. So that feels honestly desperate. Doesn't even feel like it's like a botched attempt at being stylish. It just feels desperate to get to the superhero runtime, whatever that is now. So they had to drag out the scenes even more with that shit. So, going back to the beginning, no idea how this is the kind of movie that, sparked this whole thing of, oh, critics are so wrong. Yeah. I kind of feel like, and I don't want to, like, immediately assume things about people or their opinions. Like, I'm sure there's people that are passionate about this. Probably, maybe people that are fans of the character. I don't know, because I don't know how well it's adapted. But, I do wonder with the hype of the credits scene, and the hype people will leave with because of the credits scene, if that is kind of swaying their opinion a bit. Where it's like they forgot how shitty the movie was because of how hyped they were about the credits scene and what it represents and what it means going forward. That's the only thing I could see, because there's nothing, there's not a single ounce of anything here I feel like there's something to be passionate about. Like I said, when I didn't feel nothing was when it's just fucking terrible. So that's basically how I walk away from this. So let's go to Ticket to Paradise. The second movie in a row where it's like you see the advertisements, you see the poster, you see who's in it, and you see the concept, and you're like, what year is this again? But every now and then that can kind of break through a little bit. And maybe I still more or less hate romantic comedies, pretty much. But it seems like every now and then one will break through that people don't particularly like that I will. See, Marry Me. Was that last year or earlier this year? I can't remember now. But, the one with Owen Wilson, where it was like, I totally get why people hate this, and normally I hate movies like this, but I don't know, this movie just kind of has a charm to it. Um, and I kind of felt the same way about this, also. And it's where you have, Clooney and Roberts, who already are going to bring some sort of charisma to it, even if it seems like it's a very tired approach and a tired concept. And it's like, why would they do something like this at this point in their careers? It seems like a weird move, but and it's one of those things where it's like Adam Sandler syndrome, where it's like, oh, they're at this vacation spot and they're filming there, so it's like, oh, we're just watching rich people vacation. How great! But I don't know. They bring something to it, and I think it also helps a lot that our third star is Caitlin Dever on top of this. So it's like, yes, this is a very tired plot about two parents who don't get along and also don't want their daughter to rush into marriage. But it's like, it's one thing to have that plot. It's another thing for that plot to be played by Clooney, Julia Roberts, and Caitlin Dever. Then it's like, okay, there's got to be at least some charm to this, some charisma to this. And, yeah, honestly, even though I say that, I'm legitimately surprised that there is charm and charisma to this movie. But it's like, as soon as they walk in and the two of them start, bickering and going at each other, I feel like in any other circumstance, I would be saying, oh god, this shit. And it's like, for God's sakes, just either kill each other or get back together or do whatever you're going to do. Just don't do the bickering thing because it's so played out and so annoying. But with Roberts and Clooney doing this back and forth, this dislike for each other, trying to one-up each other, I found myself finding it funny. And I thought it was funny to see these characters, like, because that's basically the whole movie, is them going at each other. And there is that inevitable thing where it's like, okay, yeah, they're eventually gonna fall back in love, obviously. But I think one thing that helps is that it kind of takes the approach we talked about when we were talking about the Parent Trap remake, the Dennis Quaid, Natasha Richardson stuff, where it's like, it doesn't feel like a split up couple that doesn't get along. It felt like a split up couple that is aware that their marriage was rushed into. And so, like, they're very aware of why their marriage didn't work and why they're not good for each other, and that comes up throughout the movie. There is a scene at a bar where Clooney has a scene with Caitlin Dever's friend, and Clooney's telling her the story of why he and Roberts' marriage didn't work out. And I swear, it looks like a deleted scene from Up in the Air. With how, like, seriously it played itself and how much it said, like, we know why the characters got to this point. It's not some comedic situation or anything like that. It's just simply a marriage that didn't work out and was rushed into. And he plays it very seriously. And obviously Clooney's a great actor, so he can really pull this off. And it was kind of at that point where I was like, okay, so this movie is, like, kind of aware that... It feels like it's aware of these tropes, and while it is still doing these tropes, it's doing them in a way that the characters actually feel kind of real. Like, when it actually gets to the moment... I feel like this is, spoilery, but I mean, it's inevitable in this movie. Everybody knows it's going to happen. We're going to get to the scene where he and Roberts kiss at some point. And the way this scene is handled was so surprisingly good and mature. Like, it's the way you would expect them to react to kissing each other after everything that's happened up to this point. And yeah, if there's one thing that brings the movie down, it would be the fact that it doesn't necessarily use its situations very well. Like there's comedic situations here that it could have built on, and that's what the best of comedies like this do, is they have one comedic situation and then that situation just kind of builds and builds. And I don't recall that ever happening. It kind of felt like they kept setting up situations and then just didn't really have payoffs. It's one of those movies where there's a lot of moments of people getting bitten by animals. Like, there's a big moment where Clooney gets bit by a dolphin. And you think it's going to be like this big comedic bit, but that's essentially the main punchline. And then this guy that's going after Roberts gets bit by a snake. And that instead of making that like this comedic situation that builds, they kind of make it a plot point. And it's like, I don't feel like the comedy's really being utilized as well as it could be in these situations are. But there are some things that were surprising, like when you talk about the setups to the conflicts, which is usually the boring shit as far as these movies go, because it's like, oh, we know this is going to eventually lead to this, and then there's going to be this conflict, and we'll have to wait for a resolution, and so on. But the main conflict is, because they're trying to stop Caitlin Deaver's wedding, they concoct this idea to steal the rings from the child that has been put in charge of them to halt this wedding. And it's like, there's multiple levels to how fucked up that is. Because like I said, not only are they stealing the rings to prevent their daughter's wedding, but they're making this child feel like it's their fault. And for a movie like this, I would call that admirably fucked up. Like, the fact that the movie went that far in its cruelty, despite still feeling like this feel-good movie, is something I actually, like I said, kind of like about it. Because you do watch these romantic comedies and you're like, man, I wish they'd take, like, one risk. I wish these people would do just one thing that's just, like, really off-the-wall terrible. And I would say that fits the bill. That's pretty fucked up. So I do admire it for going that route. I also like, another trope that the movie doesn't fall into is as far as like the awareness to them trying to fuck up this wedding, because you would think like the fiance of Caitlin Deaver would be just like this oblivious idiot who's barely in the story, and then it'd be like just a matter of time before they find out what's going on. And very, very early in the movie, the fiance approaches Clooney and says, I know what you're doing here, and I know what's going on. And that becomes basically their dynamic through the movie. And that's another thing where it's like, that could have been such a boring trope. And they just cut it off very early, and made the fiance character a little more interesting by doing that also. So, yeah. I really like the choices this movie was making, honestly. And also, like, just in general, like I said, the casting is going to work. Because not only is, Caitlin Deaver an amazing actress, whether it be book smart or unbelievable or dope sick or whatever, she's just showing how incredibly impressive she is and just the fullest potential that she has with every new project, it seems. And she's like one of the most exciting people working on. Like, when she's involved with something, I immediately get excited because I feel like there's going to be some level of quality to it. Regardless of everything else around her, even if it's just her, it's going to be something worth watching. And with that on the table also, I would also like to mention that one of the tired tropes in romantic comedies is the love at first sight thing. And it's like, oh, of course. And it's like, you just immediately, like, oh, great, this will last all of a week. And that's another thing, too, is they talk about, how long will this actually last? And the fact that the movie takes the approach of, let's just see. Like, the movie never really tries to get you to believe happily ever after is a thing. And the fact that Clooney and Roberts are a sole example of that. But I will say that when Caitlin Deaver comes out of the water and steps onto the boat and they lock eyes and you see, Caitlin Deaver, it's like, from the fiance's perspective, I get the love at first sight thing. So it's like, not only does she have immense talent, she has that ability as well. Where it's like, I totally believe this guy would see her and just say, this is my life now. So, as far as all of that goes, and all of these, subverting tropes a little bit, or embracing tropes but doing different things with them, that's where I feel like a movie like this can actually succeed. And I feel like for the most part, that's what this movie does. Yeah, and another thing that actually really surprised me was how well-paced it is. I felt like the movie is like, I feel like maybe an hour 40 something, or maybe like an hour 40, like right in that area. I felt like it flew by. And movies like this, typically, like I said, when you know a movie and it's going through its motions, and you know every beat to it before it even starts, can make a movie feel like kind of a drag and kind of long. But I feel like this movie is very breezy. So I feel like that's helping a lot. So, yeah, I actually quite like this, believe it or not. So that's really all there is to it. So let's end on Wendell and Wild, which was a very exciting movie, coming out of the gate. Henry Selick was coming back, after Coraline, and Peele was co-writing it with him, and Key and Peele were going to star in it as the title characters. And then, it played at the festival, and the reviews were insane. So it's like, wow, I cannot think of a movie with more hype, at least as far as where I'm coming from. And yeah, maybe that did it in a little bit. It's kind of The Black Phone was the last movie I talked about like this, where it's like, maybe I overhyped it to myself. So if I feel underwhelmed, it's my fault and not the movie's fault. And that's pretty much how I do go into this. But I do just love the idea of Peele, hats off to Peele for not only finding this place in the industry, but it feels like Peele has basically, now that he's found his fame and good fortune, he's basically doing like all the dream projects he probably ever had. Because it's like some people do one movie, reach total success, and then they just fuck it up completely. And it's like Peele does Get Out, he wins his Oscar, and then it's just like, oh, now all the possibilities are here, and he's gonna take all of them, which is amazing. So it's like you see he's making his own movies that feel very original and like their own thing and like his own vision, and he's creating this sort of iconic place in horror particularly. But then he also gets to co-write Candyman. He gets to, reboot The Twilight Zone. And it's like, all these dream jobs, and then doing a Henry Selick movie, I feel like would have to definitely have been on that list as well. And so you see this, and it starts, and right away, I love the fact of the monkey paw logo being animated. So all of this is like, okay, I'm definitely feeling this. And, yeah, obviously it starts, and we're very quickly, and we get a backstory, which feels very Peele, because it's a tragic backstory, where it starts at a family at a carnival, two parents and a little girl, and this little girl has a candy apple, and it's like, oh yeah, the last time a Peele movie started this way, some pretty bad shit happened. And yeah, that's the case again. So as we're introduced to this other world, like you would see in a Henry Selick movie, it is one of those cases. It feels a little Beetlejuice inspired, I guess you could say. Because I guess because of Night Before Christmas, there's always going to be that Selick Burton connection where people still think Burton, directed Night Before Christmas. It's still a problem, but still. It does feel like, when I say Beetlejuice inspired, I do mean both the movie and the animated TV show that Beetlejuice had. But once again, Selick is still, I don't want that to take away, Selick is still obviously very much his own style and his own thing, and something that you can recognize immediately. Like I said, Burton is that, Peele is that, and yes, Selick is that as well, for sure. And when you see this world, it's almost like, you're kind of glad that it went to streaming, because I feel like it would almost be frustrating to see this in a theater and not be able to, pause it and see all of the detail that's going on. Because that's the thing, is it does build this giant world with all this detail, but it does kind of also feel like it goes by a bit too fast. Because they do use the animation as well as they can, as far as, not only just showing world, because that's the thing when you think of Selick, it's just showing worlds, but there's also some of the really specific things they do where you tend to wonder, how in God's name did they even animate that? Is something that Selick can pull off a lot also. There's the whole thing of, honestly, it's not even just the animation, it's the ideas. It's the ideas and the writing also, where it's how does one even come up with this? You kind of see that in a lot of well-done animation, but Selick in particular, it's just man, I wonder where that came from. But I know some of his stuff is based on books. I'm not sure if this is coming from a source material or not. But Yeah, the idea of Ving Rhames being this giant, I guess, Satan-like creature, and they live inside him, and they essentially tend to him and help him grow hair with this cream. And then eventually they find out that this cream can bring the dead back to life, but also they can get high off of it. And so there are these scenes where they eat the cream and then they start to like trip out, and the way that stuff is animated is really wild. So it just seems like this endless array of ideas, and the way this that goes into this world. And as far as there being a comedy element to it, just in general, like I said, maybe this is in the animation, maybe it's in the voice work. It's probably everything working together. I felt a positive energy from this movie by the fact that not only does it have a lot of funny bits in it, of course the fact that it stars Key and Peele is going to help this, but Wendell and Wild were characters where just when I would see them, like they didn't even have to say anything, just when I would see them, I would start laughing. They were just inherently funny to me. And then when they would do their back and forth and all that, it would just get funnier. So I was very much appreciating that. Like I said, we've got these wild ideas, like Bears a Bubble, I think it was called, where it's how they find out that they have a Hell Maiden, who is our other main character, this girl from the beginning who lost her parents and now has to be... And now these are demons that are basically in her life now that help her... Everybody in this movie has a goal, has a different goal that's coming from a different direction. And they're kind of hoping to band together to get these goals, to get to these goals, one way or the other. Whether it be legitimately helping each other or maybe deceiving one another. You never quite know for sure what's going to happen with demons. You're never quite sure, are Wendell and Wild going to be villains or heroes or something like that, and that's fun. And so, yeah, so you have Beelzebub will come in to say that they have a Hell Maiden, and what Beelzebub seems to start off as is this, like, head of a pink gummy bear with a child's voice. And it's like, just the ideas in this of where the hell did this come from are endless. And in a world like this, that's what you want to feel. Where it's just like, what is around the next corner? What insane imagery or insane idea is going to be around the next corner? And that's great. The trouble is that once all of this is established, the movie has other things that it wants to focus on, seemingly a lot more. It takes an interesting approach where we've talked before about how Peele's movies have some sort of, underlying commentary in them for sure. And how that's kind of his thing. And his Twilight Zone went way into that. That was the way his Twilight Zone committed to that might have been one of his problems. Like, it got too committed to that. And it started to feel less like the Twilight Zone and more just more about the commentary. Whereas it's much more underlying in his movies. But here we're talking about, like the prison systems, and you can get that. I feel like I don't mind that it's here. It's just like, do it enough to maybe get the vibe, and that it's like this underlying thing, but it does feel like it puts itself very much in the foreground, especially since we have corporate bad guys in this. And it's like as soon as we saw the corporate bad guys and they were established, it was like, what Lorax bullshit is this exactly? And that's not near as over the top as, like, the corporate villains in something like the Lorax, but I was surprised to see it in a movie like this, and I think what really highlights the fact that this is a problem, and that it takes away from the details of the world and the fun of the world and exploring the story in that kind of way, is that the movie is too long. Where you look at Selleck's other movies, or other movies of this kind, really, and you've got like 70-something minute runtimes, or at most a 90-something minute runtime. And this one's an hour 45, which is very long for a movie like this, and probably too long for a movie like this. And the fact that you can tell it's because that we're putting a lot of focus on this stuff, like the prison system stuff and the corporate bad guys, than we are, exploring the world and seeing all the different details of it. It feels like this big, giant world they established is just a background for all of this, instead of us feeling like we're going, like, headfirst through it. which is the more fun way to see Selick movies, and the way Selick movies are usually done. But yeah, so I think just trying to overcomplicate the plot is where the movie kind of reaches the problem, and then we do reach a very obvious climax. It's one of those ones where, once again, feeling long, it's always... These movies always feel like they have a few climaxes. Like, there's always one thing, and then when it feels like something's resolved, oh, there's always the bigger thing, and then we have to go through another climax. And like I said, the animation is amazing, but it's... I feel like the action of the climaxes, and the fact that there's multiple ones, kind of starts to wear everything down a little bit. And it kind of takes away from how amazing the animation is. Because then you're just kind of feeling like the movie's starting to get a little bloated, and then that's all that's really on your mind. Which is unfortunate. And I feel like that, in general, is what keeps it from being, like, you know, a potential future classic. I'm sure it still could be, because Selick just kind of has that kind of power. And, you know, maybe if once you've had time to see the movie, like, multiple times and can really, really take in the world... Maybe, but I don't see this being at the status of something like The Night Before Christmas or Coraline, or anything like that. So, I want to say James and the Giant Peach was his also. I always feel like there's like that one that I'm missing. And then I keep always wanting to subconsciously throw Corpse Bride in, but that one actually is Burton. So, yeah, but see, I don't think this is going to be the classic that those others are. But it is just great to see a Selick movie again. And I love the idea of him teaming with Peele, and what they've done here, what they've created here is big and grand and great, and has so many ideas going on. But like I said, it's the plot elements that kind of feel like it's dragging it down a little bit. So, yeah, but I'm still fine with it, and like I said, it's still hard to, you know, try to take anything away from a movie that's this well made. So. There's that. So I think that's all I want to say about these. So we are going to continue with finishing out the stuff I still need to finish out for October, some horror verses and stuff like that, and the Mr. Mercedes stuff. We're still doing the 3 Todd Field movies, and whatever that mystery movie is that Regal's doing, I will see, and then probably just come right back here and talk about just immediately by itself. Whatever that ends up being, and then we'll see where that goes. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.